Good morning, everyone. My name is Jill Shahen, and I am a founder and managing partner of Empire Chartered Consultants. Today, I have with me a longtime friend, Mr. Abeku Hayes. Yay! Abeku, tell everyone about yourself.
My name, like Jill said, is Abeku Hayes. I am currently principal of New York City Montessori Charter School, the first public Montessori school in the South Bronx. A little bit about me before that, I wasn't always an educator. I actually came to education by happenstance. Didn't realize there was an education crisis, a teacher shortage. At this point, this is eons ago. And I was actually a musical theater performer. And so I was doing very well doing that. I was very fortunate, never had to be a starving artist or anything like that. And found my way to the classroom to help with substituting for a little while and found out that there weren't many teachers who stayed teachers. Um, I had grown up in the Midwest where everybody in my neighborhood had the same fifth grade teacher until she retired, that kind of situation. And New York was just such a different landscape. And so, long story short, I substituted for a couple of weeks while somebody was on active duty or leave or whatever you call that for the armed forces, and got really good results and was told like, hey, we really need you to teach. And I'm like, no, there are lots of better people. Like my degree says I sing pretty, teaching isn't for me. And then long story short, here I am. I was bitten by the bug and couldn't run away from it ever since. And I've been very fortunate to see many students go from below basic to proficient, including my own children. And so it's been a really nice experience to be able to really see the impact of the work that you do. You know, it's one thing to get standing ovations and to get applause. It's another thing to see a child go to college or develop a career or a passion for something that they didn't know existed before that.
That's tremendous. So I actually met you when you were a teacher at a
Yeah.
different school a long time ago. And then we were reconnected and we started working together. I have so many questions for you, but I'm only going to ask four. And when we unrecord, I
I'm
have a
ready.
good question for you. Okay. You've worked in charter schools for some time now. Talk to me about working in a school as a teacher versus running a charter school and the biggest lessons you've learned.
So I think the biggest difference between being a teacher and being a leader, I would have two different answers for that. From a teacher's
Yeah.
perspective, the thing that I love, that I preferred about being a teacher is that my impact, my hands on being right there with the kids, like having the children within arm's reach, their data within arm's reach, and being able to control the instruction that happened in your room and do things that people said you couldn't do or things that certain kids couldn't do. That was what I loved most about the actual teaching. It was wonderful to always have the benefit of being praised for scores and things like that. But at the end of the day, the thing that was most exciting about being in the classroom was that I was at a school where I was creating my own curriculum, and the gains that my students made, I was able to strongly attribute them to exactly the choices that I was making, which is one of the things I really loved. What I hated about being a teacher is that I had instructional leadership in my school who I didn't think aligned with the way that I thought our community needed to be served. When I met you, we were actually going through renewal, and I was one of the only teachers being observed multiple times throughout the day in different lessons in different rooms. I was teaching in classrooms I never taught in, but being moved for the sake of the renewal visit. And that bothered me as a teacher. And I was like, I will be a leader because I'm going to make it so the teachers have the right environment. I think as a leader, the thing that I love is that it's like having a bigger classroom. But the thing I least like about being a leader is that my students aren't kids, they're adults. And adults are much harder to navigate things with. And I always say this to people, it's because they have opinions that they have based on some experience, some knowledge base, whatever. And whether or not you agree on it or it aligns to the philosophy, getting them bought in is much more difficult than it is with children, because their children are just open and excited. Whereas when something's hard for an adult, it's a lot harder to get them to go against go into that discomfort, to ride it out, to like figure it out, to learn management, to learn instruction, to like learn those things if it's not what they originally wanted. I find that a lot of teachers come into education with the idea of that, like, we're going to do a unit on apples and we're going to eat
Right.
apples and we're going to hang up apples and then we're going to dress as apples. And
Yeah.
there's actually no academic like merit to it. But like that was their idea of being a teacher.
And I know you felt that. I watched
Yeah.
you struggle with that. I don't even
I
know
mean, I
if
was
you
very
struggled
fortunate
with
in
it.
being an active first
There was a lot
because
of
you're not allowed. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, there's a lot of philosophical views, right, that didn't really align with what you were trying to do. And I do remember when you started at your school, I was like, oh, we got to get teachers back to just teaching, right? Like we got to actually dig in and get teachers back to teaching. And you knew that. I think you remembered me from the last school and you're like, okay, she does not play. Like she's just going to let us have it. But I didn't see anything that you didn't already tell me I was going to see. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That sometimes I go into school and I say to the school leader, hey, what are you going to see? And they tell me 10 things that I'm never going to see. And you're going to be like, students not engaged. You're giving me the list as I walk through the hallway. And it was all exactly what you knew. It's not easy. I don't think when I'm in a school, I have a tendency. I don't think when I'm in school, I actually pay attention all the time because school leaders will always fluff it up for me, right? Like the best school leaders just simply don't fluff it up. They're just like, here's all the stuff you're going to say. Hey, but here's the 10 things I'm trying to do to fix them. And you are one of those rare people.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I think it's really important. Like one of the things I always talk with my leadership team about is that we are in this for the guaranteed things. We're not in here just throwing everything against the wall. We are going to guarantee things. And the only way we can guarantee that is if we're really truthful about how effective we are, how effective our team is, and what parts of that we're responsible for. Like, let's not spend our time complaining about things we can't control. My teachers really had it enough of me right after the pandemic because I was like, no one's allowed to say COVID anymore.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
like, because teaching reading, teaching math has not changed. So, what would you have done if you had one child that was this far behind? Now we're going to multiply that and do that for every child. COVID, I don't want to hear COVID. I want to hear what we're doing to fix the problem.
That's an entirely different video for you and me. Okay.
Yeah.
What are the biggest challenges, in your opinion, that charter school leaders face?
I think one of the biggest challenges is that like existing in the in between, right? So like charters, much like any large body, right? Whether we're talking about cultural groups or talking about friend groups, there can be an overarching similarity and varying ideas and perspectives on how that should be carried out. And so I think one of the really challenging things facing charter school leaders right now is that there are agendas at various levels, starting from the highest offices in government all the way down to, the school level recruiter, right? And everybody has their different goal or their different thing that they're trying to do. I think currently as a charter leader, one of the challenges I have is that decisions are often made at the government level that have a really strong impact, especially on schools like mine, which I always like to say is a mom and pop school, right? It's a very small school, it is very specialized, and we're super motivated and excited to do the work that we do. But we live in a world where the schools that get the most traction are the ones who are best packaged, have the most lawyers, have the most money. Like, and I think that that's a very interesting thing because the challenge for me has always been that I really bought into this idea when I was a teacher at a charter school that like we take all kids and we make it work, right? We make space for them, we make space placements for them, we create instruction for them, and we get them to their goals. And I think that I've always tried in all of the schools that I've been a leader at, I've always tried to carry that with me first, right? One of our values at our school is that we carry the children in our hearts first, and we let that precede any decision that we make, right? We prioritize them over everything. And that's something that's really important to me. Was that motivated by the fact that my children went to my own school? Absolutely, right? So it really helps to like kind of push that narrative. And I think what can be really challenging is that when it comes to financing, when it comes to support from the government, things like that, that's one really difficult pot for me because there are always like rules and things that like edge certain schools out. Whereas whatever legislation we pass should be inclusive at least of all the schools that already exist. And if it doesn't help every school equally, then what is the real point of the rental assistance? What is the real point of, you
That's
know,
exactly right. That's exactly right.
and so I think that's one of the most challenging things. And I think secondarily, the challenging piece is like feeling like an island unto yourself. I feel like at every charter school I've worked at, one of the things I've had to fight against was this idea that like our network was the best, right? Like no one else is teaching the way we teach. No one else can do what we can do. And I don't necessarily agree with that. What I can agree with is that everybody else isn't making space for kids. Everybody else isn't accommodating the needs of every learner in their building. Everybody's not
I
building all of
know.
the spaces that those kids need, regardless of their bottom line. And I think that's where it gets dicey because it is a business. Like that's not lost on me. But it's a business of humans, right? Of both the teachers, the parents, the children, like all three of those stakeholder groups are all a part of this. And we can't make decisions just because it's cheaper to have more high performing general education kids than it is to have low incident special education kids in your school. If you need to have 12 to 1 classrooms, then open 12 to 1 classrooms. And I find it so strange that the people with the most money are the ones not doing that. And the people with the least amount of money, like my little mom and pop school, are. We change our classroom placements, we change our staff, we change the people who have various certifications. We work very hard to do that actively to make sure that that first tenet of why charter schools exist, placement for all kids, choice for families, that we live up to that.
Y'all preaching now. We know it too. We know that you and I. So I wasn't expecting your answer, but I will tell you, I absolutely agree with you. If we are saying we can compare ourselves to a district, then you can't weed out kids that the district is taking. And I think we forget that, and it gives a black eye to the charter school movement. Like the bad stuff supersedes all the good stuff. All right,
Absolutely.
this one, I'm really interested in your take. How do you view the authorizing environment in New York, and what would you like more of and less of? And before you answer, I go at the authorizers, right? I'm about independence and autonomy because you are a smaller school and you're not going to have all the money and resources. Though you still want to be accountable, there also needs to be accountability on the part of the authorizers and how they're monitoring you. So how do you view the authorizing environment in New York? What do you want more from them? Which is nothing. What do you want less of?
So I think that this is an interesting time for me to be answering this question because currently I am in a very heavily saturated area of the South Bronx where more and more schools have been opened and they have amazing business plans where they're growing to K-8s and they're growing to K-12s and they're doing really great things. I respect all of my colleagues and the work that they do and how hard they work for kids. But one of the things that has happened is that the battle between the two main authorizers, the two authorizers in our area, has created an environment where children charter hop, right? So they know they don't want to go to whatever their zone school is. They enroll in the nearest charter school, and then they leave that school to go to the school that's giving out free book bags. Then they leave that school to go to the school that has the nicer uniform. Then they leave that school to go to the school that has karate. And then they leave that school to go to the school that has whatever else. And so while there are various socioeconomic, cultural, historical, like things that we could talk about for hours that influence that, right? That influence this idea. At the heart of it, that is choice, right? And I live for parents having choice and being able to choose the school that their child goes to. But when I confronted my own authorizer about the oversaturation of schools in my area, they pointed the finger at the other authorizer and had nothing else to say. Well, we didn't open all those schools, the other authorizer did. And for me, that was a very difficult and disheartening kind of response because my school is drowning in a way that it never was before. And new schools keep opening even when there was a stop put on opening charter schools. So, like, even when the cap was put on and we have reached our cap, there are not enough children in this area. and more schools are opening. And I think that what then is created by two different authorizing bodies is this idea that, well, if you can't get the kids, then you'll close, which means you weren't a strong school. But I can accept that. But in the middle of that conversation, I also was told this has never happened in the history of a school. Typically, schools are closed because of low test scores and poor money management, and you don't have those issues. And I was like, okay, so what is my recourse? Because basically, what we're saying is that in this environment, a K-5 can't survive.
You are, because they want K-8. Because if there's a school near, so let's give context to whomever's watching this. So if you're a K-5 school and for some reason your scores weren't good enough or your board decided not to grow and the school above you or below you or next to you or around the block became a K-8, you're a parent and you've got a student in 5th grade, but you also have one in kindergarten, you're moving both kids. Right? You're not just moving one kid to a different school. And I don't think people actually understand. It's not about the academic program. 90% of the time, this is more convenient because I won't have to go to 2 different schools to deal with the kids.
Yeah, and I won't have to deal with 2 different cultures, 2 different schedules.
Correct. And I don't think people think of it that way. And then recently, a super high performing school leader, like super high performing, said to me, we have kids leave because we don't offer an after school program. Though our school day is longer, we don't offer it till 6:30 at night. And we've had parents pull their kids in either 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. All of a sudden they saw a decrease because we don't offer after school programming. And she said, it's because our school day is so long. We can't also ask teachers to stay this late. And so you're seeing these nuanced things that nobody's really addressing. Certainly the
Exactly.
are not addressing it. And that does scare me. Do you think there's been bureaucratic overreach with authorizers in New York State?
I would say yes. I would say absolutely. I think that it's kind of it goes without saying if you just step back and look at the landscape, or you look at who's being approved and how they're being approved and how things are being done and who's connected to whom, and like which schools are able to get away with is the wrong term, but like who are able to do things.
So let's call it what it is. Some people have more political power and
Exactly.
therefore they can direct autonomy for their schools.
Exactly.
And that's not what the charter school movement was about.
I mean, I was told by a board member of a very powerful school in our area that, yeah, we want to do away with teacher certifications. We hire who we think is best, and we say, come at us. Come at us. I can't say come at us. I don't have that many lawyers.
That's absolutely correct. You cannot, yeah, there's different rules for different people, and the authorizers play that game. Both authorizers do. I don't want one authorizer to think that I'm picking on them, but both authorizers do it. I know personally for, say, an SED school, we had one school not meet 5 benchmarks. Maybe they met 6. I can't remember. They didn't meet close to all of them and got 5 years. And another school that missed 1 got 3 years. It's like, tell me how that works in your head.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't work for the rest of us. And we've spent a lot of time in this company calling out that type of behavior. And Abeku, we haven't spoken in so long. You know what's come from that? They're asking us to stay quiet. They're like, well, you don't have to point it out publicly. This is
wow.
public. I can read your documents. Other people other than us can read these documents. You're not fooling anyone. You just don't want it said out loud. And I kind of feel like if we don't say the bad parts out loud, the movement tanks.
Exactly. Not only does the movement tank, but kids suffer. They don't get what they actually need. I mean, and there's such an interesting situation because we have had a very interesting year this year. Our school is currently struggling with enrollment, and we're trying to engage more families because our families, once they come, they're very happy here. But it's getting them to come here when I'm not giving them a laptop that they get to keep forever. And I'm not giving, which I don't think is allowed unless it's being purchased with private funds, but whatever. Our school doesn't give an entrance exam and then let you know that this school is not a good fit for your child, like skirting around little laws and things. And these are stories that are being reported to us by families that are coming to us. And it's very disheartening because I understand why it's happening, because having those high scores, having that reputation, that's how you perpetuate your institution. But if we all do it honestly and we all do it with the same ratios of children, because it should be impossible for any school to exist in this district and have less than the specified amount of L students, of students with special needs, of students that exist below the poverty line. Like, I think it's interesting to look at these things, and when I do, I'm always like, is no one else seeing this?
We all see it.
How do they not have more than 50% economically disadvantaged in their school? And it's interesting that their ads have all become very white as well. Like, but the school is down the street from here. Like, I'm so confused.
The whole diverse, and I have
yeah, exactly.
Diversity doesn't upset me, right? When we use the word diverse in school,
yes,
we're also using it not to take in certain students.
Yeah,
and I've said this a million times. I actually had a conversation with somebody last Friday about it, and I said our clients are the children. My clients are not the adults. Yeah, the adults are paying us to come in, but our clients are the children. Is this what's best for students and families? And if we can't say with a straight face, it absolutely is, then we have no right to be in the education market. And it continues.
Agreed.
I have one last question, and I think you'll chuckle because I wrote it based on your board.
Uh-oh.
School leaders work closely with their boards, or they're supposed to. Pretend you had to mentor a new school leader about working with their board. What is the advice? By the way, people, one time, a long time ago, Abeku's board chair asked me to come to New York City, which I was more than happy to do because I had Abeku on speed dial. And when I got all the way to New York City, he decided he no longer wanted to meet with me. And I was
don't say New York City when you got outside the building.
when I got outside the building, I actually got all the way there, got into where I was supposed to meet him. I was told, oh, he doesn't want to meet you now. I'm like, I just get 4 hours away. I was like calling you. I'm like, all right. So what advice would you give a new school leader about working with their board? Because I would tell you that is the piece that never really translates well, or it looks like it's translating well to begin with. And then 6 months down the road, a school leader's calling me going, I know why all the other school leaders left.
I think I'll answer this question as if I was speaking to me 8 years ago when I came to this particular school. So this school was my first time not being a part of a CMO as a school leader. So this was the first time I didn't have a central office between me and the board. So I always had to work with the board. I always had to, report out and do all of those things. But I never had a relationship where it was just the board and me, and then all of my staff. And I think the advice that I would give is managing up is the right thing to do, right? Managing up so that you get things done and you can keep things on time. But managing up and accommodating is not the right thing. So I think if I was to give myself advice, my old me advice, it would have been one, to search out and seek out really successful school boards as a model and spend your energy facilitating a relationship between that chair and your chair. Because not to necessarily model after them, but I think that going to a board meeting that's well functioning, hearing committee reports reported out correctly, seeing the formation of like how it's supposed to be run is really, really important. Because prior to coming here, I had always been in situations where the network team had enough money that there was like someone taking notes for the board. There was lots of supports in place so that all the board members had to do was like show up, right? Packets were being made for them. So I got a false impression of what a board was supposed to be doing. And then when I came to this school and those things weren't being done, I just started doing it. I started scheduling the meeting. And I mean, going so far as bringing snacks to the meeting and making sure everybody's packets were color coded with little tabs. And like, I really took it seriously because it was very important to me at that time, especially that the school be successful, because I had a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. The 2-year-old was at the daycare downstairs. The 4-year-old was in pre-K, and I needed the school to improve, and I needed them to get behind any idea that I had because the school was in dire straits. And we were able to get all of our renewals and do all of the things that you aim to do. But I think the thing that I would definitely say to a school leader is super important is one, getting a really good relationship with your board where you can be honest. Two, having a good model for what should be done as a rubric that you can hold them accountable to so that it doesn't become a power struggle between you and them, but more like, hey, this is what's supposed to be happening. Where's that at? Whereas the mistake I made is that I knew that there needed to be a data sheet that they were monitoring. So I created the data sheet, but I also created the way it was monitored. I created all the protocols. And then when no one did it, it was just, I was like, oh, if I was teaching a class, I wouldn't have done it this way. I would have made them a part of the process so that they would be accountable, but I wasn't in the position of power to make them do that. And I think that had they seen other boards function that were successful, even if it wasn't a school board, I think that would have been really helpful.
I think also a lot of boards have committees that they don't utilize well enough, where, let's say there's an academic dashboard, and we've said this to schools, it's not a shock. We take the renewal benchmarks, right? So we're hitting on all of those every meeting. When you report out data, tell the board what benchmark it's attached to, because there's nothing worse than going into a board to do a board training and no one's familiar with the benchmarks, because nothing has been attached to it. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's been attached and they're like, oh, but we didn't know what that meant. So I think like PDs for boards, but new school leaders by far, and we've watched school leaders, there are school leaders that hop, hop, hop. There's nothing you can do about that. And a lot of it is my board is just so dysfunctional and I can't run a school and manage the board.
Yeah.
And we did this whole thing on management versus governance. Like, what is governance? And then what is management? The school you manage, they govern, but they have to collect information from you to govern. I think new leaders are so ill prepared unless they've worked in a charter school and they know, but exactly what you said, which is like your color coding. It's like, go to tab 4. Here's our map testing data. And if you look, this is our cohort. Well, now we have to define cohort. Now,
Yeah.
and it's like,
It's a lot. And I mean, it's one of those things that like what I've gotten better at with some of my board members is when they say, Abeku, can you make X? I say, I'm happy to assist so-and-so make that because I know that that person's the secretary for this committee. Please let me know a time that we can work on that.
And you have,
But in the past, I would go and I would make these elaborate things thinking that like, oh, then they can turn to the addendum and they'll know what that means and they'll go to whatever. And then I send it out 3 weeks ahead of time. And then I send an email a week later explaining what they should be doing this week to prepare for next month's meeting. It gets to the meeting and everybody's like, I saw that you sent something. I'm like, I sent 6 emails. You wrote back,
oh
thank
my
you.
God. If I had $1 for every time I have heard, well, I saw they sent something. Did you read it? Like, do you think
exactly.
you a hey, what up?
Exactly. How's the weather?
I start laughing because there are times when a new school leader, not in New York City, called me and she said, I was prepared for the dysfunction in the school. Mentally, I knew I could turn it around. And I went to the board and said, did you know we didn't have a curriculum? Do you know we don't have assessments aligned to the state standards? And they were like, oh, yeah. But she was really good and used to do all of our board packets. Like the secretary of the board didn't have to do it. And she left within a year. She's like, I can't fix a school and a board. And it takes a lot to get everyone on the same page.
It does, and it has been a journey and a road. The one thing I will say at the beginning, at least, is that the majority of my board members are very good at taking orders, right? So when it came time, because as you know, I started here 2 months before our renewal. And the school was in a really rough place. And so I spent literally every day of that 2 months coaching everyone on like what it looks like to teach a lesson, what it looks like to have a meeting, what it looks like to engage families, and literally drilled my board and made them practice their answers. And like, I was like, Here's how we're answering, because this is what Abeku is changing it to be. What has happened before now is bad. What we're going to do is good. Everybody listen.
And I know you mean that too, because I know what it was like, because that's when I was in there. And I
Yeah,
just
no, and
remember
the
like,
teachers too.
do you
I
remember
had
I
like you
sat
did a
down in the
great job of
office? I sat in
scaring
the
them
office on a
straight,
chair.
right?
I was like, I'm never coming back to this school again. I was like, never, I did come back, but it was like, oh my God, what is going on?
Yeah,
Like,
it was a rough, the transition of power and all of that. It was a complicated time. And I think I'm actually very proud of that though, because I think I was able to save the pride of the founder while also like mitigating the issues between her and the board, while also still getting the school ready. And we got our preliminary renewal, and then we got a bigger renewal the following renewal season. So that was,
we,
it all worked out.
do you know what's interesting about that? We talk about founder syndrome, right? Somebody who knows what a community needs can get the school up and running. But you know, and I know there's a difference between that piece, a startup, and then the long haul. And I think
Yes.
that is where everyone was caught. And I
Yeah.
love your founder. I loved the founder, but I also recognize founder syndrome when I see it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that takes it. So those are my 4 questions. Do you have any questions for me?
I mean, I think my biggest question is that if you had to say what your one goal is in the advocacy work and the school consulting work that you're doing, after all of the things you've done in your career so far, what is your main spark? What is the thing that's lighting your fire right now to continue the fight, to push the work, to continue to advocate in the way that you do?
Because, oh, that's really good. And we talked about COVID. Hey, you don't want to hear COVID anymore. I need the excuses of why we can't teach kids to stop. I need it to stop, but I also need it to stop on the authorizing level, right? Like recently, SUNY renewed a school at 8% for 5 years with growth. And it doesn't matter how many times I read the report, it's still an 8% school that got growth. Like, how? Listen, and I love the school leader. I've always loved the school leader, and I understand. And ready, but it happened during COVID, right? So part of their startup year and time happened during COVID. I can respect that, but you're not going to see so much on the ground that you're like, oh yeah, they're at 8%. That would mean nobody was getting taught during COVID, and why aren't we more concerned about that? So for me, the spark is this: we made a promise to students and families. And for a long time, we have all skated on the COVID excuse. I have not, Andrea has not, like, we're just not falling for that crap. Now it's time to put everyone's feet to the fire. You said you could teach children. We want to see it. We want to see it at the school, because we'll say to a school, what is going on? How can we help? But equally to the authorizers, at what point do you keep allowing schools to use COVID as an excuse? And at what point is it okay for everyone to weed out kids from the school and not say this is no longer acceptable? Like, we know all the schools all over New York State who weed out kids. I got to,
Absolutely.
this is not even a joke. A long time ago, a school in the western part of the state called me and they said, is it true we don't have to take in special education students? I said, what? And they said, oh, we called
Wow.
another school. And they said, oh, if you get one of those, I want you to listen to how I reference that. You
Consider
don't
me
have to
officially
take them,
triggered. It's fine. Go ahead.
right? You don't have to take them. You can just tell them you can't serve their child. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not how it works. But we're not talking 20 years ago in a movement.
Yeah.
We're talking 4 years ago in the movement.
We're talking, and that's happening right now.
Right. And so how did we get here? And we spent a lot of time during the time when schools were virtual teaching, and we started pulling apart reports and we started asking questions, right? And we really started asking questions that people should have been asking all along, which is, how did this happen? And you're not on probation. How did this happen? And you're not on public corrective plan. And a lot of times we don't disagree with renewal decisions, because if you're a school 20 something years old and you're still a failing school, if you've had 4 or 5 leaders, this isn't working to your favor.
Yeah.
I think we need authorizers. I think authorizers or we're there to not play politics. And that's where we are. And so that is a spark I can keep like burning people on the ass with, and nobody really, right? Like they're not going to change because some people have all the power. I don't have it, but I got a mouth and I'm going to use it. And we both know Abeku. I will use my mouth. And then on the other hand, you have schools that will just make excuses. So for me, the spark is, are we doing what's best for children? And if we are not, we all need to take a step back, everyone in the movement, and say, how do we get all on the same page? How do mom and pops work with successful CMOs? Wait, how does everyone move forward together?
Yes.
We are not. We are all out there hanging on our own, holding our own secrets, not asking for help, because sometimes if you ask for help, then your dirty laundry gets aired someplace else, and it's got to stop. We're just simply not helping children.
It's
And
true.
I thought your comment about saturation, we saw this year that the legislature could put a kibosh on opening schools in Harlem, right? Like, you can't open more schools, they're saturated. In the meantime, you're correct. Schools are adding grades and growing, and it's killing the market for independent schools. And here's the other spark. I want more authorizers. I want more independent authorizers. And this is going back to in 1999 when I worked for SUNY. Where did we lose the community authorizing? And so during COVID, we sat and we made a list of every single school that applied, every single school in an 8-year span. In that list, we said, right, who withdrew, who was approved, who was community, who was CMO. What was the race of the people rejected? And then I called everyone who withdrew or was rejected. I called every single one of those people. Why do you think you had to withdraw? Why do you think your application was rejected? And the answers shocked me, and it made me mad. And I hadn't been mad in a really long time. I want to go back to community authorizing. I want to work with community groups. I want to work with independent schools. We work with a ton of CMOs nationally. We just work with a ton of CMOs. And I love them and respect them, because the CMOs we work with all have the same thing. How is this helping students? And if we're not helping students, let's reevaluate how we're moving forward as a CMO. But for me, let's get back to community authorizing. Let's add another authorizer. You know what? The authorizers want schools to compete for students. Now you're going to compete for the charters. Let's add another authorizer. Let's add 2 other authorizers.
Absolutely.
Why don't we?
And I thought that was actually an interesting part of my conversation with some representatives from the NYSED charter school office, when I had asked about the cap and why schools still were open. And they said, oh, well, the other authorizers snapped those charters up because they used them as a part of expansions, which is the current thing that's happening, is that people are adding middle school, adding high school. And again, as a parent, my children are 3 years apart. I would definitely want them in the same school. Like it's a no-brainer. But if that's the case, then that needs to be something that we keep in mind. Otherwise, they're going to be, 5 charter schools that are all K through 12s with 27 sites. And then is that truly school choice at that point? Because some charter organizations, their goal seems to be the biggest, most powerful district in New York. But like, for what purpose if your college going and staying rates aren't high? Like, everybody gets into college, but everybody can't stay in college. They can't manage being in college. So did you really do it, or did you like express such a strong grip that like when they got out into the world, they didn't know how to do things? Like, I have 4-year-olds in my school that know how to schedule their day, because we're Montessori, and that's
Can I
what they
work
have
with
to
one of them? Because I got a hell day ahead. Can I
listen.
say something to that? So I'm all about school choice. So if somebody wants to pick a school, but they should at least know if a school starts with 100 kids and 17 graduate, like,
Absolutely.
why can't we use transparency in choice? I'm not asking for much. I believe every single school in New York State charter school needs to exist. I actually believe it. Everyone is serving either, the same population or close to the same population. They all have the same struggles, facilities, right? Like, you know, all the stuff, finances, how much you get for special education students, all of that, how your audits, right? All of those things you do. So I do believe there's a place for everyone, but I don't believe there's a place for everyone without transparency.
Absolutely.
And that word as adults shouldn't make us scared. Yet I have other adults asking me to stop saying the things out loud. And it's like, great. Listen, I'm never going to be the smartest person in the room, but I can tell you I know how to read and I know how
Yeah,
to digest information. So if I can, people far smarter than me are looking at this and saying, is the movement working the way it was intended to work? And I
that's
would,
what I always come back to.
right? I would tell you yes, because we have these schools. On the other hand, no, because we're lacking in transparency, which is the same thing we accuse unionized schools of. And it's not
Exactly.
right, whether you like that or not, it's just not right. Okay, I've kept you. I'm going to stop recording, but I want to talk to you for 5 more minutes afterwards. Everyone, Abeku, he's amazing. He's my friend. That poor man had to sit through me more than one school. Thank you, Abeku.
Thank you.
Let me stop recording.